Randy Waldrum, how are you, brother?
I'm doing great, sir. How about yourself?
Good, man. It's really good to have you on the podcast. As you know, I've been trying to figure out our schedules for probably almost a year now, trying to get you on. But you're a busy man.
Well, if you really dive into the sport, as you well know, it keeps you quite busy, and of course, I'm loving every minute of it. I think you and I probably both agree we haven't really had to work a day in our lives, because we're doing what we love.
I couldn't agree more. It doesn't mean it's not hard and stressful, but we could be digging ditches for a living, I guess. So
That
it's a lot better than that.
exactly.
Yeah, it's not to talk about our ages, but it is nice for me to have somebody with more experience than I have on on the podcast. And I think one of the interesting things about your career early on, Randy, you did what I did. You pulled double duty for quite a few years at Tulsa with the men's and the women's team.
Yeah.
And boy, that's something. That's a task, isn't it?
Well, yeah, you're right. With our age, we remember those days, and of course, we've seen dramatic growth in the not only in the sport itself, but in particular in the college game and on the women's side. But you're right. I started my career Division I wise at University of Tulsa, where we coached both programs, and a lot of us did that back in the day. You just load both teams up in the 15 passenger vans, and off you'd go and play somebody that had a men and women's team and the hard part for me, and I don't know how it played out for you, but after a few years and we got both programs where they needed to be in terms of winning and success, we found that the men needed to be going to play teams like, SMU or Air Force Academy, but our women needed to be playing University of Arkansas or somebody, different. And when it got to that point, I would go with one team um, for their match on Friday, and whether it be the men, on Friday, and then I'd hop on a plane Saturday and fly down to the women's game on Sunday and coach it. And that got to be a real challenge because then obviously your teams got frustrated that you weren't with them all the time. And of course, back then we didn't have full-time staff. We had GAs. So GAs were kind of coaching. But I will look back at it and say this as a young coach back in those days, it really helped me in my coaching. You're getting to do double coaching as a young coach early and handling different kinds of problems. So um, with the hard part of that, there was a lot of good that came out of it as well.
Yeah, I don't know how you handled it. And it was different times. My last stint at doing both was 2010 to 2018. And and I noticed the hard part was me having to switch hats because I did training one team right after the other.
Yep.
And like so for example, the first year that I came in, they had a the prior coach had the men training first and then the women. And so I just said, well, I'll just keep what they did. And
Yep.
it did not work for me. I had to switch it because I found myself being mad at the women for no reason. Because the men
Yeah.
just are at a different frantic pace.
Yeah.
Just the intensity of the men's training and the men's sessions and the way that the men needed to be handled was completely differently than how what the women needed. The women didn't need
Yeah.
that warlike intensity on them all the time and didn't want it. And I
Yeah.
found myself yelling at the women for no reason. And so I
Yeah.
had to switch that. And then it was fine. If I did the women first and then the men,
Yeah.
not an issue. I could always ramp it back up. Did you find that difficult too, coaching men and women back to back?
Well, I did. Probably for me the hardest thing for me at that time, and I do agree with a lot of what you were saying, because back in those days the women's game was just evolving from having, all the club soccer back then, the women, it was dads that was coaching, right? And so when they got to us, it was the first real experiences of having kind of quote unquote a professional coach. So they listened and they were sponges to absorb all the information. So they were really eager to learn. And I think the men sometimes, as you said, it's half the time they felt like they had the answers, and it's just a different dynamic coaching the two. But I think for me the hardest part was just, God, I remember those hot hot summer preseason days, and you're out there because you're doing 2 days. With back in those days, all of us
Right.
did 2 days, and so you're out there 4 hours, in the morning, and then you're coming back for another, duplicated. I mean, you're on the field literally all day long, and it was exhausting. I don't know that I'd want to do that at my age now, but back then you just did it, and that was a part of it. But it's great to see that we've really grown a lot, from back those days. Yeah,
Yeah, and look, men's and women's side too. So this was 80, early 80s, right? Early to mid 80s. This was the mid 80s you were doing this, right?
that's right. Uh-huh.
And so I graduated high school in 81, and I think like 78 for me out here in California was the first time we had women show up for our men's soccer team because they didn't have a women's team in high school. Title IX had been fully enforced now, not just put into law, but they were enforcing it. So you had to give women the opportunity to come try out. And the attitude back then, at least our coach was like the first time like 4 or 5 girls came out for the guys team, we ran for like 2 weeks before we even touched the ball.
Yeah,
And by the end of the second week, we said, when did the balls come out? And he says, when they quit.
yeah,
And that was the attitude towards the women's, participating in sports, let alone in men's sports. But um, in the 80s, there weren't a lot of women's teams in the country, period.
no, no.
Right? So like,
Yeah.
do you remember how many
I,
teams there were and how far were you guys having to travel?
yeah, I think, I was at Tulsa in 1989, and I sat in on some of the selection committees, and I can remember sitting on one where our women were up for potentially making the NCAA tournament. And I believe back then it was less than 100 Division I
Yeah.
women's teams, playing. And so, yeah, you're right. It was not there. Before I got to Tulsa, I had taken on a couple of part-time jobs. I was coaching high school all day, and then I took Austin College for a year, and NAI school at the time. It was part-time in the evenings, and I did that at Texas Wesleyan. And although, unlike you, I didn't ever have any women coming out for the men's teams, but we did play games in our conference where some teams had female players, on their men's team back in those NAIA schools, before they ever started a women's program. So yeah, it was less than 100 back in the 80s. I mean, it wasn't, and the disparity was it was pretty much Carolina and then everybody else, on the women's side.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
if
Right.
Anson scored 9 on you, you knew he would stop because he wasn't going to go over 9. But there was nobody even close in the Division I level to Carolina in those days, and it really was in its infancy back then.
Yeah, I know if we forget, I mean, no disrespect at all to what Anson did, but there was no competition in the
No,
early days
no,
of them destroying everybody. When we look at all their championships, and now you look, it's equal now. I mean, there's
yeah,
there's 10 women's schools that could win the conference any given year,
easy.
and which is something I've noticed, and I'm wondering what your thought is on this, and maybe why. See, on the men's side, we see the Vermont sneak in, and we see the Akrons, get in there. It's like Akron's just a state school, folks. There's nothing,
Sure.
there's nothing academically special about Akron. Or we see these upsets in the men's side, and
Right.
we don't see any of that on the women's side. I mean, you
Yeah.
you and I could probably bet our year's salary on one, 10 schools are going to win it, and nobody outside that is going to win it or has won it. And, we
Yeah.
get the occasional these days Santa Clara, snuck in during COVID,
Right.
which
Right.
was, they'd had a long dry spell, but they have a history.
Sure.
It's not like they don't have a history of winning it.
Right. Yeah.
Why do you think we see the dominance on the women's side that we don't see on the men's side?
That's a great question. I think part of it is, I think part of it is financial, obviously, with those that have and those that don't have. And obviously, the Power Fours just have more resources and financial support over the mid majors. Back when I was at Notre Dame and, being there 14 years, and I think we played in 8 Final Fours while we were there. But back in those days, it was us, it was Carolina, it was Santa Clara, Portland. Like those were kind of the top teams. And then when the major conferences got involved and started adding women's soccer as a sport, then I think that really changed the dynamic. Then of course, back in those days, out when the Pac-10 was going on, with UCLA and USC adding teams, and so I think a little bit, you don't really, and part of it might be Title IX, because in the Power Four conferences, not all of the schools, support a men's team. Quite a few only have a women's team. And so I think it's a little bit of that. Whereas the men to me have always been more, I guess the word I'm looking for is purist at heart, and we can dive into like this 2-semester model, but it kind of ties into that whole thing. Is they've always been about wanting the game to look like what soccer throughout the world looks like. And I think the women are in a different place where they want to have it special, that women are different than men, and they want to specialize it in their own way. And I think because the Power Four is not completely supportive of men's soccer throughout those conferences, I think the men have continued to see teams like you mentioned with Vermont and even until SMU got into the ACC, SMU's always been, a top team in Division I. And so I think that's just kind of been their track record. And when you talk and you do this for a living, so you know it better than I do, but all the players want to go D1, and they don't understand that there's really good mid majors. It's not all Power Four, and there's really good. I went to an NAIA school and was still drafted by the pros, and loved my career. So, but I think the men just more look at it like, where can I go and play in a good brand? And where's the women? The women have kind of evolved this whole, I got to play D1, and then more importantly, can I play Power Four in D1? And so there's probably several factors that make that happen that we see today.
Well, and then here's the other one, and some people don't like when I say this, but I say it quite often, anyways, because it's the truth. There is a supply demand issue going
Mhm.
on here. On the men's side, the supply of very good players coming in from all over the world outweighs the demand. There just aren't
Yeah,
enough slots in
yeah,
college for the men's game. So they can be pickier and they can unearth talent that's really hidden and very, very good players. I mean, when I was at Feather River College, junior college, I took kids. I took a kid one year, English kid, that nobody else was recruiting. Uh, Pitt, ironically, was men's soccer back when they were struggling, when they were like
yeah,
0 wins, 1 win, 2 wins. They were really struggling for a number of years.
yeah.
Was the only school that wanted this kid, and we took him in at Feather River for 2 years, and then he ended up at Penn State. And he
Mhm.
was an All-American. He was a 6'4" center back stud,
Yeah,
absolute beast. And you could find that on the men's side. There's no woman equivalent that's hiding anywhere in the world that somebody
right.
doesn't know about, because you've got this, there's more teams,
Yeah,
right? There's more
yeah,
college teams for women than there are for men, more college spots by a number of thousands of more
right.
college spots. Yet, even when you go look at ECNL, which is the top league for women, and you can
Yeah,
find dozens of teams that if you went and watched them, you go, there's not a single girl out here that
yeah,
you would have ever considered
right.
at even a mid-level Division II would
Yeah,
never consider. They're not very good. They're just
right.
filling a spot that needs to be filled. On the men's side, that's hard to find. When we go out to MLS Fest, for example,
Hmm.
It's, you could, every single team, you could pick out two kids who you go, that kid could play for almost anybody in the country, not literally, but, could
Yeah,
play for 80% of the schools in this country on any given team. And you don't see that on the women's side. So I think it's
yeah.
also a supply versus demand issue. Would you agree?
I agree. Definitely. We have more opportunities, between just the sheer number of teams that we have at Division I compared to the men. So yeah, I would totally agree with you on that. I think you hit it right on the head.
And it's really tough, and it breaks my heart with the goalkeepers. Like right now, I'm still getting hit up by national championship contending teams on the women's side. It's like, do you have a goalkeeper?
Yeah.
We can't we can't find a goalkeeper, and I've got a couple of guys, goalkeepers that are still looking for schools, and they've got offers, but they're very good, and they're
Yeah.
still sitting out there because there's so many more, and it just on the women's side, man, it's a struggle finding a goalkeeper.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think too, on the women's side, when you mentioned ECNL, I remember when it first started, it really was the elite league. They kept it to the small number of clubs, and I can remember going out to the national championships, I believe out in Seattle, seems like it was, and the level was quite good, much like what you're saying with the MLS Nags. But then I think it became just what every other league has become. It's money, it's driven by numbers and money, and it's a business now. And you're right. There's no way if it's the elite league, you should be going to watch two teams play and one team wins 7 or 8-0.
Right.
It's not elite if that's happening. And so, but I think those are all, you know, part of a different conversation with, where we are in youth development and how do we fix some of the problems that we have. And that, yeah, we could probably spend hours on that one.
All right, can I put you on the it's because it's we say it's a different topic, but it's not. We're talking, you and I are talking from a college soccer aspect, and I'll look from my perspective. When I coached back in the 90s, it was so easy to find the best talent in the country. We went, I was in California, so if we went to the play days in Northern California for ODP, right?
Yeah,
And we saw the 9 different districts in the state of California,
right.
literally at Cal State East Bay at least. I really didn't have to look much farther than that to be
Yeah,
able to find the best talent in Northern California. Each
sure.
city, town, area was pulling together their best players from their best leagues, putting
Yeah,
them together. In Northern California, we had 9 districts. Southern California had 12 districts. And then, the best of those were put together into a North and a South state team. And
yep,
when they went to Idaho, usually to go
yep,
play against the Western districts, if the Western states, if you were there at that regionals,
yeah,
you were seeing the best players in the West, men and women. There
yeah,
was no doubt about who the better players were. Sure, there might have been players who didn't want to play ODP or didn't know about it or
yeah,
whatever, but it was loaded with college coaches, and it
yeah,
was truly the best players, and it was easy to find the best players in the country. And if you followed teams through State Cup,
right.
right, and all
Yeah,
the way to the McGuire Cup, and
yeah,
you knew who the best teams were, and it wasn't hard to identify talent.
yeah,
Now we're so spread out with, I don't even know the names anymore. I mean,
yeah, yeah,
NPL, but I think it's NP1 now because US Youth Soccer and
right.
USYS are combining, and but we've
Yeah,
got that, and we've got, you know, uh, GA and
yeah,
ECNL and everything, all the iterations of the alphabet soup leagues. We've got players so spread out that how could a college staff go and identify talent? That it's like, well, we've
yeah,
got, well, now you got 4, but still, how can 4 of us cover all the ground, and do we have the time? And for a lot of
right.
schools, we don't have the money to do
Yeah,
it. We've got a budget, and so
yeah,
we can't afford to do it, and we have families and we have lives, and
right.
so I think the idea of ECNL, as you said, when it first started, I don't remember what it was.
Yeah.
18, 20, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was very small. It was the elite, and the idea of that was great. Was
Yeah.
great. I thought it was good. I never thought it made sense for Southern California, frankly, because
Right.
a Southern California team does not have to leave Southern California to play
Yeah.
against the best players in the country. It's
That's right.
the dumbest thing ever, but they did, and whatever. But now we've made it so difficult. So what if you were the commissar and everybody had to follow what you dictated to fix youth soccer, what would you do?
Well, you kind of touched on it. I couldn't agree more. I'll make two quick points of what you mentioned. One is you're right. As college coaches, even with the addition of the fourth assistant, when we go to an ECNL event, for example, there are so many games going on and so many fields to cover. You can't, even with four coaches, do justice in really spending time and evaluating talent. I mean, you're bouncing 20 minutes from one field, because it takes you 10 minutes to walk across to the other field to get to the
Right.
second half. I mean, you're just not doing a great job. Now you're doing that over 2 or 3 days, but you don't really get to evaluate those kids the way you need to. And can you imagine why maybe we struggle with in the women's side in particular at the national team level, with the lack of success at, youth World Cups at the 17s and 20s. I mean, they're sending 2 or 3 scouts, to these events too, to try to identify their players. So it's not a good system. So to me, you hit it right on the head, in my opinion. And a lot of people out there listening will go, oh, it's just Randy, he's the old guy in the room, right? He's just reminiscing. But that was the best system. I understood in theory when ECNL started is if you're not getting competition in your local league, then travel to, another state and play good competition. In theory, all of that sounds great.
Right.
Now it's gotten to a point to, like you said, you don't need to leave Southern California to go get competition. But now even across the country, teams are traveling hundreds and hundreds of miles to go play competition, and it's not really any better than if they just stayed in their local area and played in the league. So I think the best system we ever had was just what you mentioned, the ODP system and the state cup that USYSA had. You played in your local league, you got your competition. Some states are going to be stronger than others. We get that. But there's a process of advancement, and then you go from that to regionals, and you go from regionals to nationals. And so as coaches, we could go to the West Regional and see, in theory, the best teams. There's going to be some upsets every now and again, right? But in
Sure.
theory, you're seeing the best teams. And then you go from regionals to nationals. That to me was brilliant because it really identified the best players. I think the ODP system back in the day was a great way of identifying top talent for college coaches, but even for the pathway for our national teams. Because the thing
It was a
there,
true pathway, right?
it was a pathway, and when you played with your district teams and then your state teams, and then the state teams went to the regional camp, you also saw them train, for a week, and you saw games at night, and then you saw the best players held over for another 3 or 4 days to play these pool games, and then you advanced to national. So you had a lot of opportunities to really get to watch these kids. At ECNL, you're bouncing 20 minutes here and there. And I just don't think it's a great way to evaluate talent. And I think you learn a little bit more the more time you get to see with these players. I would even go back, Don, and even add this to a little bit of the recruiting process. It's really, lack of a better word, it's asinine that we have the recruiting rules that we have. I mean, you can't talk to a kid, you can't have them on campus until June 15th of their sophomore year. But you know what? On June 15th, we're going to be offering you a full scholarship to come to our university. You've never met that family.
You can't
You
even bring him on campus till
you
August
can't
1st,
even
right?
you can't even bring them on campus till August 1st. And no wonder the portal is loaded with kids that are
Right.
making these hasty, unhealthy decisions. And back in our day, it was done in the senior year. You did home visits. You brought the kids to your campus. You got to know them as people a little bit. You got to know their families, and you could make a much more informed decision. So we have the dumbest recruiting rules in the world, if you think about it, especially for the kind of financial investment, that we're making in these kids. And so I think those are some things that, the NCAA needs some legislation done. Our youth soccer calendar is just, it's out of control. It's not really what I would say is a youth development system anymore. It's just go play games, go get evaluated. And, I go down to Dallas still. That's home for me. And I go watch, I think I was down at FC Dallas, a couple of years back, and I went to one of their fields. And they got like 4 teams training at the same time on one field. So you're getting a
Insane.
quarter of the field to train. How do you teach anything about the
Insane.
game in that? And that's just what we've grown to. It's just a money making machine, and we're just players are jumping from club to club to get playing time. It's not a true development model. And so I would go back to what you mentioned, the way we used to have it. I think that was the best process that we had. I think too, I don't know, Don, how I could afford to put my son through youth soccer
I've said the
today.
same thing. My son would not be
Yeah.
playing
Yeah. I
in
could,
the higher levels. There's no
yeah,
way I could have afforded it.
I couldn't either. And, so it's a method that definitely needs overhauling. And I hope U.S. Soccer does something about it. We'll see what really comes down after the World Cup. But there's a lot of work to be done if we really, really want to produce top level players. We're producing a lot more good players, because more are playing, but I'm not sure our best players today are any better than the best players were back when you and I were coaching in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, right? I think so. Any rate, that's
Well, the funny thing is about that, Randy, is I talked to a lot of coaches, men's and women's,
yeah,
and then I also, we've been fortunate enough to partner with some people and sent kids overseas to play in Spain and in the league system, and the comments are always the same. Your kids are fit,
yeah,
right? They're fit. We're as fit as, with the
yeah,
exception of maybe South Korea or Japan, we're as
yeah,
fit as almost anybody in the world, and technically not bad. Our better
yeah,
players, technically
yeah,
not bad. I mean, there's always some work to do, and so there's some things we don't do very well as a country, but tactically we're lost.
yeah,
We have
yeah,
no idea tactically, and I always thought, even when I was a youth coach, I thought it came down to not watching the
yeah,
game enough. That youth don't watch the game hardly at all, really.
yeah,
Just I think if we did a survey of this coming World Cup, they'll say, are you watching the World Cup? Yeah, I watched the U.S. play.
yeah,
Yeah, but did you watch Morocco play? Have you noticed
right,
how good Morocco's gotten? Have you
yeah,
noticed how differently Spain plays, or how differently France plays? Or have you noticed the difference between the South American teams and they have no idea what we're talking about?
right.
Um, they don't know. So it's I really think that's what a lot of it comes down to is that our kids aren't watching the game enough. And absolutely on the women's side, it's a big, big, big problem on both men's and women's side, but I think especially on the women's side.
Well, I'm shocked when we get kids, and Pitt now, we're typically a top 25, top 30 team in the country, and
Right.
I'm shocked at kids that we get in and they don't understand the principles of the game. They don't understand concepts of defending in twos and threes and very simple, basic things that should be enforced at a very young age. And I said, what do you guys do with your clubs? I mean, how is this new to you? How do you not understand the principles of the game at least? And so, um, there's a lot to be desired in the way we're structured now. There's a lot of positives, but I don't think we're in the right path to to become what Spain is in the women's game, or to become what France is in the women's game. And I think, you go watch the Japanese teams train, and you watch our teams train, and it's night and day different. And so, I don't know what the answer is. It's almost like we got this big snowball rolling, and it got bigger and bigger, and it's going down the hill, and we can't stop it now. And that's kind of where I feel like we are in youth soccer. There's so many different organizations that are making so much money off of this, that they're certainly not going to be the ones in the forefront trying to make changes. They have their own interests at heart. And so I think our only chance is if U.S. Soccer comes in and tries to set some guidelines and take some control, in this area. Interesting enough, I did a coaching course for the 2011 World Cup in Germany. We took a group of coaches with United Soccer coaches over there, and talking to the DFB, and got to visit their youth setup. It was really interesting, because one of the things they said is everything is about player advancement. And they said, so for example, in the youth leagues, if you've got a kid playing for Borussia Dortmund, and they're playing in, the second division of that league, and then you've got, Bayern Munich playing in a division up, if Bayern sees that kid and that kid's able to play up, then Dortmund just pushes that player forward, even to an entirely different club, but it's all about the player, pushing the player forward. Here, you can't even get within your own club. You can't get
Right,
a good
right,
player pushed up to
right.
another team, because coaches are going, well, that kills my team.
Sure.
I can't win anymore. And so that concept, the mentality is just completely different in some of these countries, and their youth development models. And so we've got a lot of roadblocks that's kind of holding us back right now. And I hope I'm alive to see some changes in the next 25 years or so, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, it's so wild, the dichotomy. We talk about the changes. I mean, I remember vividly, having conversations with my wife in the 80s about, I wonder if we'll ever see a commercial on
Yeah,
television that features a soccer ball rather than baseball,
yeah,
and you couldn't find, I mean, I remember when Fox Soccer Channel came on, it was like, holy crud, English Premier League highlights? They're
right.
going to show us highlights of every game? This is incredible. Because I grew up in the Toby Charles Soccer Made in
Oh
Germany
yeah,
days
me too, me
on
too. Yeah,
public access television, and
yeah,
that was my whole week was around Sunday afternoons, so that I
yeah,
could, and that's all there was. And other than that, I'd get my hands on a magazine, and that magazine would be so dog-eared and chewed up, because I'd pour through it. I think that's how I learned to become a goalkeeper, is because I was reading articles about, how so and so, how Sepp Meyer stopped a penalty kick or something,
yeah,
and that was it. That's all there was for most of my life
yeah,
growing up, and now we've got, more soccer on television than we know what to do with, if you've got,
yeah,
internet access,
right,
and you've got, culturally, it's now become, soccer mom is a cultural term.
right.
I think it's
Yeah,
probably in the Urban Dictionary, and
yeah,
we have this massive change and growth. You know how it's grown in the country. You were here at the, not the beginnings, but kind of, sort of. I mean, the
yeah,
70s is when it started really, really
yeah,
taking off, so to speak. And now we're where we're at, and it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And yet, playing wise, as you said, I don't feel like, we're just as far behind. Heck, in 1934, we were in the World Cup quarterfinals.
yeah,
You know, how can you go from, and I know there was a limited number of teams in Uruguay,
right.
but how can we go from South Korea even,
Yeah,
that World Cup? How can we go from that to where we're at now, where we're just as far behind? We're not, it's frustrating. The women's side has been different, but we're
right.
slipping now on the women's side. We're
Yeah,
not,
we
we're
are.
not, it's not us in Norway.
Right,
We knew it was going to be us in Norway. We knew that,
yeah,
one year, 94, we knew it was going to be probably China
yeah,
and us. We just kind of knew who it was, but
right.
there was no doubt we were probably going to win it. And
Yeah,
and now those days are gone.
that's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot of minds bigger than mine need to come in and solve some of these problems, I guess. And
Yeah,
it,
yeah,
but
yeah,
it
yeah.
is it does warrant to me a very hard look. And like I said, it's going to take coming together from a lot of different organizations that are willing to say we need to buy into a different vision than what we have right now. And I don't know how likely that's going to happen or not, but we'll see.
So back to college a little bit. One of the other things that this is just a gripe session, I guess, but I'm talking with one of the few guys I think understands both sides of the game, the men's and the women's side. So on the men's side, obviously we have a recruiting cycle that is uh, it's senior year. It's nothing's going to happen till the kid's senior year. Yes, there's a few exceptions. We've got we've got a few top players who committed their junior year, but very, very, very few.
Yeah,
They're dead on, can't miss, obvious players. But 90 something percent of the men will not only won't commit till their senior year, but it'll be spring of their senior year.
yeah,
And on the women's side, we've got, we jokingly, lovingly called it the Anson rule. Anson was,
hmm,
famous for recruiting the 13-year-old U.S. national team kid and
yeah,
getting her to commit. And then we made that change where, you can't talk to a kid till June 15th going into their junior year.
yeah.
And as you said, we've got top players that are committing. I think it's got to still only be the top 2 to 3%. It's
It
not
is.
not really that not really what people think it is,
Right.
but it's happening. And then there's so much, Randy, that can change in a kid's life
Yeah.
between their junior and senior year.
Yeah.
I frankly, and maybe people won't like this either, but I think the women's side is pure insanity that
Yeah.
we're asking 16-year-old kids to decide where they want to be at 22.
Yeah.
And I think they could change career paths. Not to mention, it's a verbal commitment. Coaching changes. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, coaching changes happen. They do.
Yeah.
And 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 these days, coaches and players' words don't seem to mean a whole lot. And I'm generalizing. There
Sure.
there are certain coaches where no, I committed to you, and I don't care if I find a girl who's World Cup caliber. I'm not backing out on you and your family. There's a few of those,
Yeah.
but increasingly, I'm noticing coaches just saying, "Yeah, it's just business. I found a better player. Sorry," and
Yeah.
players going, "Yeah, it's just business. I got a better offer. Sorry, coach."
Right.
And it's because we're not seeing that almost at all on the guy's side.
Yeah.
Almost none, almost
Yeah.
no decommitments. It's because they're later in the recruiting cycle and they've had
Right.
time to really think it through.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think? Do you
I
agree that's insanity, or do you just
no,
think it's a necessary
it's
part? And
it's
and
more than
why is the women's side doing this?
it's more than insanity. I think, and I go back to it, and I know we're going to dive a little bit into the 2 semester model here in a few minutes, but I go back to what I said earlier. The men's coaches to me have a much higher, and I'll take flack for this, but they have a much higher experience level of understanding football as it is, not only here, but around the world. And then every aspect about players and player development. They just have a better understanding of it. Um, they have made a conscious decision that they know there's differences between a sophomore and getting that kid to commit than what that player is going to look like when he's in a senior year. So you haven't had coaches on the men's side come in and start to jump and move that calendar up earlier and earlier. I can tell you when this really happened with sophomores on the women's game, I was at Notre Dame, and I think this kind of spearheaded a lot of this going. We were already going to the junior year on the women's game instead of the senior year, but then we had a summer visit scheduled at Notre Dame for Lori Kolupny and Lindsay Tarpley. The week before they came on their visit to us, Anson had them in Carolina. and he got them both to commit. So then at Notre Dame, we're looking at it going, he's getting sophomores to commit. It's him, us, Santa Clara, Portland. We've got to start getting sophomores. And I can
Wow.
tell you this, Don, the first sophomore class we got to commit was fantastic, and they ended up having great careers. The second sophomore class we got, out of the 5 kids we brought in, one was good enough to play for us when they got there. Their bodies changed from the sophomore year, their interests changed. In fact, in most of the cases, by the time we saw them as a senior, we were looking at them going, oh my gosh, what did we do? You know, like if we would have waited till their senior year, they would not have been players we were recruiting. But we
Right.
had verbally committed, so you know, we honored it. But we had we had a class basically that didn't help us. So we purposely then started backing it down on our own. But I think that started this evolution in the women's game. And then I think what compounded it was the mid majors came in and realized the only way we can compete with the power fours is jump on them early, offer them a full ride, and give them a deadline. I need to know, and you know, here's the offer. I need to know in a week.
Right.
And some parents, unfortunately, are not strong enough to say no to that, or are not strong enough to say, no, we're going to go through the whole process because they were afraid that amount of money was not going to be there to them, and they take it. So it just on the women snowballed. But I think that's also the naivety of our coaches in the women's game that didn't look at it and say, this doesn't make sense. There's going to be so many changes in this young lady's life between her sophomore year and her senior year. The men, like I said, with their experience, I think they understand everything about the game and understand the process of development and chronological development and how your body change. And they just refuse to do it. And I think that's the difference. And I think that's a big part of a lot of our problems in the women's game. I think we have I think we have an apathetic group of coaches that don't actively take part in legislation and knowing what's going on. They leave it to a few others to do it. And then all of a sudden they're going, wait, what happened? I didn't know about this. But they
Right.
don't, you know, I think they're very apathetic. Whereas the men, to me, are much, much more engaged with everything collectively that's going on. They compete like crazy against each other, but collectively they're much more unified in how they believe the game should look.
Well, that's probably a good segue into the 2 semester model because that's part of the problem. I will not mention names. I have talked to leadership in the women's side that that anybody will listen to. They've got that much power.
Yeah,
And whatever they say, pretty much they'll let them do it. And
right.
they do not want the 2 semester model. They
That's
don't
right.
want the season extended. They don't want the 2 semester model.
Yeah,
I always say look, if you want to know the difference between the men's and the women's side, take the dead period in Christmas, and that tells you everything. The
yeah,
men do not stop. In fact, the men's recruiting begins at the dead period,
right.
and the women's side wants the time off.
Yeah,
And I understand the need for family time. I do. I understand the need for a little recharging the batteries. Absolutely, I get it. But you know, to take the period to take that period off when it's only just, you know, we just finished our season. Now it's really we need to
right.
dial in the next class. I think tells you everything. And I think we're
Yeah,
seeing some of that idea that we like our season. We
yeah,
don't want change.
yeah,
We want that spring to be a little easier.
yeah,
We like that. We're seeing that carry over into this women side leadership not wanting the 2 semester model. And honestly, it carries down into the mid majors. I've seen
right.
some very vocal women's coaches on X
Yeah,
saying they hate the idea of the 2 semester model. It could be the
yeah,
worst thing that ever happened to soccer, and they're just mid majors. And but yet you are a proponent of the women's side moving to the 2 semester model. So I want to hear, I
yeah.
want I want people to hear the other side of the argument.
Well, here, look, there's a lot in it. And let me start by saying this is I go back to our coaches being apathetic. You're absolutely right that our leadership does not want this. But I think there are more coaches out there that are hidden under the rocks somewhere that would be for it, but haven't really spoken out. I know that the leadership will say, well, 83% of our surveyed coaches don't want it. Well, okay. The way you write a survey sometimes can sway a
Of
vote.
course it does. Of
And
course it does.
also when you submit a survey that doesn't explain both options clearly. So I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. But let me say this, in all the years when this came back with the 21st century model with the men, um, and we dove into this, I've not heard one good excuse why not to go to 2 semesters. I heard a lot of, well, spring is our development, and that's where the kids that didn't play in the fall get playing time. And I've heard, well, the weather and facilities and sports information people have extra work to do if you're year round. And like I've heard it I've heard it all. And to me, there's no legitimate excuse. So I will start by saying this. Number one, there's not anything for any coaches to panic about on this because the men's hasn't even been all the way approved yet through the cycle of the NCAA. So that may or may not happen. But I do think if it happens with the men, that's the best thing for the women because, as you said, our leadership doesn't want it. But I think once our players see the men playing meaningful games in the spring and then a championship in the late spring where the weather's nice and it's 25,000 people watching it instead of 10,000 people watching it, I think they'll want to be a part of that. So let me kind of real quick give you a synopsis of my argument for this, and that is first and foremost, we work for academic institutions and their education should be the most important thing. So to me, it's common sense to say you can be in class all week and then leave on Friday for your one game on the weekend in a 2 semester model, right? Who could argue against that? I mean, if you really understand that our job, even though soccer's everything to me, my job to parents is to get their daughters an education and a degree that sets them up for the rest of their life. So that part to me is a no-brainer. I can't see an argument against that whatsoever when it comes to academics. The second thing that comes to is all of this, well, development, the spring is the development time. I'll share something real interesting with you, Don, is when this came up with the 21st century model, I kept hearing that. So in-house here, we did a kind of an unofficial survey. We got all of our kids at Pitt involved in it, and we gave them assignments. We went, back then it was the Power 5 schools still. So we had them go to every single Power 5 school, and we had signed a couple of teams to each of our players. And then the staff, we did it too. We said, go back and look at their roster for the last 5 years. Go back and look at the games played in each of those years, because this argument of, well, with spring is when we develop players. So we went back and we did all of that. And what we saw from that very uneducated way of doing this survey, we got all the data. I can tell you that we could not, outside of a goalkeeper, because the situation is a little different, and outside of injured players, we did not find one. I think we found one player at West Virginia. Other than that, in the Power 5, we did not find one single player that played X number of minimal games in the freshman year. Then they got more in the sophomore, more in the junior, more in the senior, that looked like that player's developing. What we saw was exactly what we are, is that if you didn't come in and play meaningful minutes as a freshman, the odds of you playing meaningful minutes is slim to none, because we're in the recruitment business. We get development just by them being here and getting more experience, and our kids are developing. But what coaches are doing is, if that kid can't help you, then you got to go find a better player. So there was no development. These schools, the Penn States and the Florida States and those that were arguing at the time that spring is their development, there was nothing on their roster for the previous 5 years that would indicate any of those play. If you came in and played a lot, you continued to play a lot. If you came in and you didn't play a lot, you continued not to play a lot. So there was no development to this. I would also argue that in the fall, when we have literally one day a week to train, regardless whether you play Thursday, Sunday, or Friday, Sunday, whatever, or Wednesday, Saturday. Very few are playing Friday, Sunday anymore. With your mandated day off, then you literally have, if you give Monday off, you literally have Tuesday to train. That's it. Because Wednesday's the game
Right.
day -1. Then you got a game. Then you got a recovery. Then you got game day -1 and a game. So you get one day to train. Could you imagine having a minimum of 4 good days a week to train and prepare properly for the opposition and to implement your plan and to actually coach? Because right now, I can tell you there's not a lot of coaching going on once the opening day hits and the ball kicks off, because you're managing fitness level of those players that are playing a lot of minutes and those that aren't. You're just kind of managing the games the best you can because you're not really training. So for a coach to tell me they can't develop in a one game a week model like the rest of the world does in every
Right.
pro league, I mean, are you kidding
Right.
me? Like that's just ridiculous. The other side of that too is when you play 2 games a week and have one day a week of training, depending on the day the kid gets injured. But if you get a kid that even sprains an ankle, that
Yeah.
you could miss 4 to 6 games.
Yeah.
If you're out 2 weeks, well, that's a third of your season. Now
Right.
you've got a better chance of getting that kid back. And then I've had other coaches say, well, I'm worried about, my kids going to my administrator about playing time and getting me fired or whatever. And so the spring we need to play them. And to my point, it's like, if that player's not ready to play on the first day and you've got one game a week, that player may have a chance to help you a month or two into your season
Right.
and develop. I said, but right now, if that kid's not playing for you at the beginning of the season, when there's only one real day a week to train, that kid has no chance. And that kid
No.
doesn't really understand that. But that player really has no realistic chance of making headway to break in from a reserve to a starter. Because on Tuesday, you're going to focus on your starters because that's the day you have to work to prepare for the 2 games you have over that weekend. So though, for those players that aren't playing, it's a very hard pathway to have a chance to break into a lineup when you do 2 games a week and only one game. So there's just all of these things that I look at. And I think you said it earlier, but I think you're right. Our coaches love their time off in the spring. I think they're worried about recruiting. How's that going to affect my recruiting? If I have to play games year round. Well, you know what?
That's one of the, look, I've tried really hard to come up with uh, arguments against it. And the only way I can do it, A, is to put on an administrator's hat. I
Yeah.
have to think like all the administrators that I've ever worked with. And I'm not a big fan of administrators.
Yeah.
That it's all about the bottom line. And mostly, look, I've never been at a pit. I've never been in a Power Four school. I've never had the opportunity to coach where my budgets were so big that if I heard about a kid in England in May, I could get on a plane and go see that kid and then
Right.
have that kid signed to a full ride that week. I've never been in the UCLA type situation.
Right.
So I think we got to separate those, what, maybe 50 schools out, 60,
Yeah.
maybe 60,
Yeah.
50 schools out where money doesn't matter. And I've always
Yeah.
looked at this from a middle of the road. And I always like to use Akron as an example because for 5 years, 7 years now, I've
Yeah.
heard, we're going to close down Akron. We're going to combine it with Wright State. We don't have any
Yeah.
money. And
Yeah.
I'm out here in California where, sports are being shut down. At Sonoma State just shut down all sports, right?
Right.
We're in a state
Yeah.
financial crisis. It's not going to be better in the next 5 years. I think if we go to a 2 semester model and Cal State Northridge is forced into it, they will just say, we're shutting down men's soccer.
Yeah.
Forget it.
Yeah.
An administrator won't even really look at the numbers, but it is going to cost more money. I mean,
Well,
at
Don,
least in every school I've
honestly,
ever been at, they didn't maintain the fields the same way in the spring. That's going
yeah.
to cost some money. We've got transportation issues that we may not have to face in the fall because we've got baseball and softball and lacrosse and whatever schools, and maybe we got to get another bus. And how do we do it? Does that mean we have to charter now instead of our own bus? So we do have some cost issues
Yeah.
that are going to have to be addressed. And from an administrative standpoint, I
Yeah.
don't think administrators are going to go for this at all. I think they're going to see it as more work for them and more money for them. And they're going to say, no, that's the only hat I can put it on, because I can't put on a soccer coach's hat and say,
Yeah.
this is not what's best for the kids and best for the game. It's
Yeah.
impossible. It's
Well,
absolutely impossible. But an administrator,
yeah.
I can see an administrator saying no. And ironically, Randy, Bobby Clark, we interviewed him a couple years ago and asked him, and he said, even he said, I look, I like the spring the way it is because I can take players that really need individual skill
Mhm.
and individual help, and I can give them individual help that I really can't give them in the fall. But I also know that he's looking at it from the perspective of how crazy the fall is now, not
Right.
not what it could be.
That's right.
So
That's
I
right.
yeah,
And look,
anyhow,
look,
that's
I
the
love
only
Bob.
argument I can see.
Yeah, and I love Bobby to death, but I do think if it were in a one game a week, that time he commits to those kids would be committed during his year-round season.
Right.
The
I
other
think
thing
so
too,
too.
the other thing I think if you really would dive into it, because that was one of the issues I brought up to Sash with the 21st century model. Now there may be a few more incidental costs, that are going to be there to do 2 semester, but interesting enough from just a travel budget perspective, those kind of things, the costs were very, very similar to what we're spending in one semester to play it over to play it over 2 semesters. It was a very, very minimal difference. So I don't think it's as cost ineffective as most people. Now I do agree with you, and our administrator is going to really dive into it and the numbers and look at it and go, oh, okay, it's not that big of a difference. Okay, so it makes sense. I think a lot of administrators will just go, yeah, it's going to add more costs, and in this climate and this age, it's not gonna, it's not gonna fly. But I can't find a legitimate reason. I don't think weather's a reason. We play in 100 degrees down in, the southern states in the fall. Which is more dangerous than playing in the cold.
Right.
I think if they looked at this new proposal, the game started in February, I believe. So most places you can, by the end of February, you can get in and play. And so you can schedule those small amount of games around a little bit there. I do know there's some facilities that share with other sports, and I get that aspect, but to me, those are all manageable situations. It's just learning to work with other sports, and we do that anyway. You're still,
Right.
because the other argument I always make is in the spring we're still training every day like we did in the fall. We're still playing 5 games even though they don't count, and this new model had, I think, 7 or 10 games proposed. So it's not a
Right.
drastic change. So your sports
Right.
info guy has to give up 4 more hours of the spring, to go sit at,
Right.
a few more soccer games. I mean, it's just not, I just haven't found something that says, gosh, that's a really big reason why we shouldn't do this. And I love coaching. To me, that's where it comes down to. And quite frankly, Don, I'll make some people mad on this, but I think there's a lot of coaches maybe that might be afraid of it because now, you know what? I got to understand periodization and how to plan out a full year. I've got
Yes.
to understand,
Yeah.
hey, if I only have to do one practice a week, that's a lot different than if I have to come up with 4 practices a week that really help
Yeah.
my team get better. I think there's a
Yeah.
lot of coaches that will get exposed, because I think now all of a sudden you'll find out who really is good, who's good at just recruiting versus who's good at recruiting and coaching, or who's really good at coaching. Because
You're 100% right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Look, I enjoy training more than I enjoy games.
yeah,
I don't enjoy games that much.
yeah,
I love the teaching piece.
yeah,
that's where my passion has
That's it.
always been, is in the teaching piece.
Yeah,
And
mine too.
game day, I'm just an observer and I'm making notes. And what can I
Yeah,
really do to affect the game? Not that
right.
much.
That's
Not
right.
not that much.
That's right.
And I
Yeah,
get too nervous. And
yeah,
it's
yeah,
and
yeah. No,
I don't enjoy it as much as I enjoy training. But you're right. I if you go out and watch 80%, that's a huge number, and people are going to go, "You're crazy, Don." But I'll stick to that number. If you go and watch 80% of the college trainings out there,
yeah,
we've got a long way to go in coaching education,
I agree.
and it's not very good. It's
I
not
agree.
good. But you
I,
can see it on game day. It's look, and
yes,
it's
yes,
and I know, and I'm not just going to pick on college coaches. I'll pick on youth coaches too. Go
yeah,
watch the ECNL. Go watch MLS Next.
right.
Go watch these games, and you'll say, "Oh
Yeah,
boy, what do
yeah,
we do? We've got a long way to go." It's maybe
yeah,
better than what it was. Okay.
yeah,
But better than just having the parent coaches that we had many years ago. Okay,
yeah,
but we got a long way to go. And I don't think you're wrong, Randy. I think there is a fear of the unknown going on here.
yeah. I think so. I think there's a little bit of that. But like I said, this will all play out. If the men get it past, fantastic. The other thing, Don, that I think, and I'll throw this at you too, is we play our fun. I've been to 8 Final Four starting in 1999 up to 2013 when I was with Notre Dame. I think the first year 99 was out in San Jose in that stadium. We had about 20 plus thousand. After that, we've
I
been at
was there.
we've been
Yeah.
at 9,000, 7,000, 10,000. We've been at that number for 20 plus years, right? And part of the problem is we have a great product. I don't think we do a great job of marketing, and I'll get back to that in just a minute. But I think one of our big problems is we play our national championship game, the most important game of the year, in the worst weather, the worst time of the year in
Yeah.
December, and it's forged between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Now, if your son or daughter's team is in the Final Four, you're going to pay to go. But if I'm just an avid soccer fan and I have no vested interest in the four teams that are there, I spent money to go somewhere on Thanksgiving. I'm spending somewhere to go
Right.
on Christmas. I'm not spending money to go to a college playoff game that I have no affinity to or no connection to. But I think if you move that game to May or you move that game to June, I think you have a great chance of playing it anywhere in the country and packing the house. And you've got teams now like lacrosse and softball that are killing it with the attendance. And we've been stagnant. And I think part of that is that time of the year. And I don't think coaches understand that. I think the other part of it is, and this is where I will give our leadership some credit. I was on a phone call with some of the IWSOC, the new organization that's working with United Soccer Coaches to help us out. And that's probably some of the leadership you're talking about. And I was on a call with them the other day about how do we make our Final Four better. And the interesting thing is they had probably 10 coaches on there that were some of the what people would call prominent coaches at top programs that were winning and that kind of thing. And all we talked about for an hour was, oh, we got to have good fields. It's got to be good weather. It's got to be, do we want to increase to 8 teams instead of 4? Don, this conversation, I could have put a recording on from 20 years ago, 15 years ago. These were the same kind of conversations we were
Right.
having then. We're to a point we're not gonna go play where it's not a good feel. We're not gonna go play where,
Right.
like that,
Right.
that's a given. We're doing that. What we have to do, and I will give credit to the leadership because they'd asked my opinion, and I said, look, it's not about that. I'm not worried about that. We're not gonna go play on some crappy field, right? And
Right.
so I'm not worried about that. I said, what I'm worried about is we're not making this an event. Like we got to make it, all we're selling is the college national championship. We need to make it an event that's like the soccer event of the year for women's, women's soccer. We got to have red carpet. We got to have, social media presence and all of these things built it. Like make it an event. Like we got to have a fan fest, have it in a place where you've got food trucks and you've got, activities for the kids days leading up to it and during like
Right.
days in between. I said, right now all we do is you go to a game and then you leave. That's it. But instead, all of our coaches are worried about is, no, we got to be in a warm place. We got to be in a good field. Yes, those things are important, but if you want to grow and get from, because right now we're not important to ESPN. We're not
Right.
important as a product to national
Right.
television. Softball is, lacrosse is when they put 20 to 40,000 people in Memorial Day into a stadium to watch men's lacrosse final. So if we really want to become relevant in the college sport, because soccer is everywhere else, as you mentioned, on television, but we're not relevant because time of the year and it's not an event and we're drawing 9,000 people.
Right.
Like we should be at a point where we're already putting 20, 25,000 people into a stadium for our women's national championship, but we didn't grow and we didn't understand how the world was changing to become it's entertainment now. You've got to sell the entertainment, not just you got to sell more than just the game. And you got to
Right.
get fan engagement and these fan fests and these, you know, college, football does the punt, pass, and kick contest, and like you could do that with local clubs, some kind of competitions that you bring these winners. And I think they felt like years ago when they brought in the ECNL events, the showcase event around the Final Four, that would pack the place, but that doesn't do it. It hasn't done it. It's brought some people in, but it's not. If they've got an ECNL game at 8 o'clock in the morning, they're not staying to watch the second semifinal
No.
on the night before, right? So, and they don't have a vested interest, and a lot of them don't go. So we got to have and I do think, credit to our leadership, they're thinking along the line that I'm thinking, that they understand we've got to do more than the event. The game will take care of itself, but we got to figure out how to market this in a way that television's going to want and die to have us on, So there's just some things that we've got to grow in, and my hope is that if the men get it, we'll see it, and our kids will like it, and understand that, God, I'd rather be playing a national championship in the playoffs in April and May as opposed to at Christmas time. And if you think about it, is the argument early on was, well, you might be playing up till school is already out for some universities, and you're playing a playoff in, say, the first week of June. Well, that's into the summer. And now look what we've done is our leadership has extended our season, and now we're starting July 15th. Yeah, and now we've moved our championship back another week to the men. So we have extended the season, which is great because it does spread some games out. But earlier, when we talked about the 21st century, you didn't want to go into the summer. Now, all of a sudden, you're forcing a lot of universities now to start funding things July 15th, like those mid
Yeah, that's true.
like those
That's
mid
true on
majors.
the women's side. Yeah.
Those
On the
mid
women's
majors
side.
you're talking about now, where they wouldn't typically bring the kids in till August 1 for
Right.
preseason. Now they got to bring them in another 2 weeks earlier and pay for
That's
that.
not cheap.
So
Yeah.
it's not cheap. So it's again, I don't. I'm happy that we're starting July 15th for us because we can do that. But I'd rather us be the 2 semester model where you go up into a certain month of November, and then you get a little bit of November off, you get all of December, you get part of January off. And then, oh, by the way, um, if you get knocked out, which up until your Final Four, you may be playing through May. And if only the 4 teams might be late May, early June that's in the Final Four, but then you've got part of May, June, July off as well. Like it's more time off. The kids are playing more with their ECNL clubs than all their youth career
Right.
than they would be playing in a 2 semester model. So that argument to me doesn't hold any weight either. But that's kind of where I am on it. I would say this too. My biggest fear for us, quite honestly, I think the 2 semester model will work itself out. It's either going to happen or it's not. If the men get it, then it may down the road have a chance to happen with the women. My biggest fear right now is not 2 semester model. My biggest fear is the House settlement. And I think that's where our leadership should be putting our energy right now, is figuring out it's not a sustainable model by any means. It can't work. And what we're eventually going to get is even within the Power Four, those schools that are adding scholarships and adding rev share are going to separate even more. And those that
Yeah.
don't have it are going to become less. Are we eventually going to get 30 schools like football and pull out and do Division I Power Four, the halves, and the rest of us have a different championship? What's it going to look like? I don't know if you, and I'll say this quick, and I want to be mindful of our time here, but
No, we're fine. We're fine.
okay.
Go
But
as long as you want.
yeah, but Bubba Cunningham, who was at Notre Dame when I was there, the AD now at North Carolina, I don't know if you saw, but he put a piece out a month or so ago and took some heat for it. But one of the things he said was it's more important to him to pay their wide receiver rev share money than it was to fund an entire tennis team. And he said, people won't like to hear it, but that's the fact. And then he said, in my mind, he said, where I see us going is he said, I see all of our Olympic sports becoming pay to play. And then football, basketballs being scholarship sports. So in essence, Division III, there'll still be championships. It'll still be run just like it is, but there will be no scholarships for all the Olympic sports. They'll come to school, pay their money to go to school, and then participate on like D3 in the soccer program. And I'm not sure that's the path it's going to take, but I will tell you this, knowing the NCAA like I do, it would be the easiest path for them to take, because if they have to get to a point where they start pulling the top football programs out separate and make divisions, and if they have to do that with the soccers of the world, because those that have increased scholarships and rev share, and then a bunch of us that might not have it, do we make to, like, the easiest thing would be for the NCAA, who doesn't seem to think things through very clearly. But the easiest thing would be just what Bubba said, is just come across the board and go, we need more money for football. We need more money for basketball. So you know what? We'll just make a rule. All the other sports are non-scholarship sports, just like D3. We're all on that level playing field. And then we have all the money. That would be the easiest way for them to do it. And that, quite frankly, scares the you-know-what out of me. So I don't know. I was talking to the leadership a little bit, and I said the same thing. I said, we need to have our ducks in a row and start having some ideas and some thoughts about how we can be proactive on this before the NCAA just comes in and decides what's going to be the fate. Because right now is, a lot of people don't realize this, but with the 20 million that can be raised and used to pay your athletes now, most of the schools, the majority of that money is obviously going to football and basketball. Some of the schools are getting some scholarship increases. Some of the schools are getting some rev share, but not a lot, a small percentage across the board. Even some of the Power Four schools aren't getting that. So those that have it are going to be at a huge advantage, even more so than they are now. That gap between mid-majors and those Power Fours is going to become even larger. At least if the mid-majors didn't have big budgets, at least the one thing we had, we were all capped at 14 scholarships, right? Now that cap's gone away, because some may have 28, some may have 22, some may have 20, some may stay at 14. So that disparity is even getting larger. So I think as we look at this a little bit moving forward, is something's going to happen, but out of that 20.5 million, if you go over that 20.5 million, you're fined. Your university is fined for going over that amount. The fine is only $500,000. So if you're raising 20 million, what's $500,000
Right.
fine? So that's why you're seeing some of these schools that are going, like the Alabama's going,
I
well,
did not know that.
Texas Tech last year, I think, to be a Final Four college football team, I think they spent like 40 million on their roster. So some of these schools are going to spend over 20 million to get their
Why
roster.
wouldn't you?
Why wouldn't you?
I did
So
not know the fine was that low. That's
it's
insane.
it's crazy. So I think what you're going to find is that a lot of schools are going to start getting things cut. Budgets are really getting cut around the country now. I spoke to one of our leaders that's at a prominent Division I school that has the perception of that they have more money than anybody. and they cut 50 grand out of their budget. We're taking some budget cuts, and every school I've talked to,
Wow.
everybody's
Yeah.
trying to cut money so that money can be given to football and basketball to be successful. So this is the biggest fear for me, is where we're headed as a sport in under the NCAA umbrella with this money. That to me is bigger than a 2-semester model or anything else. I think that's where our energy should go to, because you and I both know the next lawsuit coming is going to be from the women, and say this is not compliant with Title IX. If you're giving all this money, 75% or more is going to men's football, and the other 10 of the last, or other 15% is going to men's basketball. And then that 10% is dispersed maybe amongst women and some of the other sports. Like, that cannot be legal under Title IX. And if I had a parent ask me, or one of our kids, to be honest with you, I would have to say, go file a lawsuit.
Right. Right.
Why would I not support the women that play for me? I can't support and back what's going on when it affects our players. And, so I, one thing you'll hear a lot is, as you're going across the country now, is different schools with what's getting cut in their budgets. And some of it's summer school money, some of it is operational fees are getting cut, some of it, maybe scholarships getting reduced, some of it, I mean, like, schools are really scrambling now to figure out how to fund this 20 million plus. And it's not sustainable, because you're going back to the same donors year in, year out to continue to ante up 20
Right.
million each year. They
Right.
eventually will run out of money or get tired of being hit up. The other part of that is your donors, you're going to now pay a quarterback a million and a half to be your quarterback, and he has a great year. And then a different team comes in and says, hey, if he'll transfer to us, we'll give him 3 million. And he's going to
Right.
leave for that money.
Right.
Now that donor
Right.
just giving a million and a half to your school for a quarterback that left, they're going to get fed up with this process, going,
Of course they are.
I'm not going to keep donating if the players just up and leave for a better deal. So it's open free agency right now. Even in women's soccer, I'm sure you've heard a little bit about it, but so many of the women players now have NIL agents that are already behind the scenes negotiating rev share with other schools and getting pieces of that money. So it's the Wild West times 10 now. So
No,
we,
I got some people pissed off at me the other day because I posted, there's a friend of yours and mine. I won't say who it is, but very prominent school, won multiple national championships,
yeah,
said virtually the first question that girls are asking is, how much money will you give me? And how
yeah,
much playing time will you guarantee me?
that's right.
And it's like, he said, no, this is, I said, is this like at offer time? No, this is like first conversation time.
That's
This is
right.
like the first time I've ever got you on the phone, June 15th time.
Right.
And I said, well, that's pure and utter insanity. That makes
Yeah.
no sense in any hiring situation in the world where you've got 3 to 4 interviews, which is what college recruiting is. Three,
That's
four,
right.
five, six, seven, 8 interviews. You've got
Yeah.
multiple interviews, lots of kids to go through. And in the very first time, you sit down and go, yeah, can I have 6 weeks vacation? And when do I get my first raise?
Yeah.
And how much off time do I get? And when do I get my first promotion? I'd like that office sitting next to you in the
Yeah.
corner on your very first interview. In what world does that happen?
That's
And
right.
we aren't talking about people go, oh yeah, but if a recruiter calls me in the workplace, and wants me to switch jobs, I'm going to ask about the salary. It's not the same thing. You're an experienced person in the workplace. These
That's
kids
right.
have never stepped onto a college field in their life, and
Yeah.
based on what we see happening in the portal and on rosters, the majority of them won't make it.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
majority of them are not good enough, and this is where we're going. And you're right. It's not sustainable.
Yeah. No, it's not. So that's my biggest fear for our sport and for college athletics in general right now, is it's not, we're pro sports now. We can call it what we want, but we're pro sports. And it's only going to get worse. And, you're seeing top players from teams now jumping to another team because of that rev share money that's being promised out there, and I just feel like that would be where we would be better suited as a collection of coaches to put our energies into that and figuring out some possible avenues of some kind of legislation that can put a stop to some of this or slow it down or be prepared for the next wave that comes. Uh, so to me, this is the most frightening and damaging things to our sport, is this house
Well,
settle.
and because of our audience here, because of the who listens to this, I just want to push back a little bit.
Uh-huh.
We're pro sports for 1% of the players
Right,
or less.
right.
Look, the other 99% of the players out there, even the ones at the true mid majors. I
Mhm.
mean, the state school true mid majors that will
Right,
never look. It's a struggle for them to even think about winning a conference title,
right.
let alone a national title run. They're never going to happen.
Sure.
For the majority of the kids out there, this is still about I just need to go to school at a reasonable price and get my degree while I'm there. I want to play the sport that I love.
Yeah.
It's a stress reliever for me, and I just
Well,
want to play. I just want to
no,
extend
you're
my career 4 more years, and
yeah,
that's 99% of the kids in the country. So when we
yeah,
say we are pro sports, not for those kids,
yeah, yeah.
not at
No,
any of those schools, even Division I, not at
yeah,
those schools.
yeah. I would say that you're right on that. And I think to me, that's why anytime I speak to high school age kids, I let them know, you know, if it's NAI, if it's Division II, Division III, like don't shut the door. Look at it. I know you're very big about that because you're always talking about how those coaches may go to another division and you've been bad to them and didn't respond and give
Right,
them time of
right.
day. But the opportunities now have become more limited, especially in Division I because of their
True.
28 player roster limit. And they become more limited now because so many more coaches are saying, I'll just get kids, excuse me, kids off the portal instead of a high school senior. So I think these young players have to be aware of that it's not as easy. So when they get an opportunity, wherever it is, whether it's a Power 4 or Division I or Division II, they should really investigate the opportunity of a place that they can go, get the degree, be happy. It has the social setting they want. It can be they can't get hung up on the level or that. I mean, I think it's because those opportunities are a lot less now with the roster spots and with how many of those roster spots are being taken by portal kids now.
Yes, that's the other big change that we've seen
Yeah, yeah,
that didn't used to be. It not well, not that kid didn't transfer, but people have to understand, especially younger parents now, kids in high school that are thinking about it. It was acrimonious to transfer. The
yeah.
AD had to sign off on it. The coach had to sign off on it.
Right,
If they didn't sign off, you could appeal it, but
right.
basically you're suing your school.
That's
How's
right.
that go for you when you're
Right.
suing your school to be able to transfer if the
Yeah,
coaches didn't want to sign off? So yes, players transferred, but it wasn't how now it's easy.
yeah.
And and it's good in that players can't be held hostage.
Right,
It's bad in that so many coaches are using it as an easy out where we used to have to hang on to kids pretty
right.
much. And the
Yeah,
NCAA used to hold us accountable.
right.
If you weren't graduating, your kids that you were recruiting, there were sanctions.
Sure.
Now
Yeah,
coaches are just like, yeah, I've had you for 6 months. Get out. Go in the portal. I'll
yeah.
help you. Yes,
Right.
ooh, you're my friend. I'll help you get in the portal. It's
Yeah,
so easy. You'll get picked up. You're a great player. It's
yeah.
like, yeah, now coaches are just forcing kids out the door, and kids aren't having to fight through the adversity anymore.
That's right.
Oh, it wasn't a Disney movie for me in my first 6 months.
Yeah,
It wasn't a fairy tale ending in my first 6 months. I'll
that's right.
leave. And then they
Yeah,
do it again. And they do
yeah.
it again.
That's
And they
right.
do it again. So there's kids out there now that have had 4 years, 4 schools in 4 years.
Yeah. Well, and the mindset with the portal too is for a lot of coaches is I'm recruiting, high school players, but I'm also going to recruit in the portal. And so the decision a lot of college coaches are making now is going, well, wait a minute, I need to be good this coming year. And so instead of the high school kid that I'm going to have four, because what you're doing is you're weighing out, do I want a portal kid that's going to give me a year or maybe two versus a high school kid that's going to give me four? And
Right.
so what a lot of those coaches are looking at saying, well, if I get the portal kid now that's only got a year left, even though that means I don't have money for the high school kid, the portal kid's got the experience. They'll help me win now. And then I'll have the money for the following year's class, right?
Right.
So a lot of kids miss that way, not because of their talent or their ability, but coaches now have to weigh out, is it more important to get experience and try to win it right now, or get a kid that I've got for 4 years and I want that particular kid for 4 years? And in some cases, you want that kid for 4 years. She's that good. Other cases, it's, hey, she's going to help us, but she's not going to really impact us her first year or two. But a portal kid could impact me right away. So I think we'll just go with the portal kid. Then a year from the down, I'll have that money to go into next year's class to get. So it's a crazy world that we're in. But I think all of this, and I'm not one that's opposed to paying players. I do think we jumped into this with both NIL and with this house settlement. I think the NCAA didn't think either of those through very well. And I'm not really so archaic and old that I feel like we shouldn't pay players. But Don, I will go back and say we've been paying players forever. And it's called a full scholarship. You get your housing, you get your
Right.
food, you get your medical,
Right.
you get advantages in the
Right.
academics, you get private
Right.
tutors. Like you are getting paid. Like most families have to take out a student loan to send their kids to school.
Right.
So
Right.
we have been paying players. I don't know why we got on this tangent of going, well, we got to pay them millions now, to play in some cases. And but I do think there could have been a way to, on top of a scholarship, pay them a little bit. But to me, why we didn't cap that number and we didn't make it standard across the board so everybody's under the same rules, instead of just saying, here's 20 million, go spend it how you want. I mean, that's just crazy to me. And
Well, I think what's going to happen, Randy, I really do. I think, I mean, this whole settlement came about because the SEC was talking about pulling away from the NCAA.
yeah,
And I think what's happened is they've only delayed the inevitable because now what's the SEC talking about?
that's right.
Pulling away from the NCAA.
That's
So I
right.
think we'll see the best of the SEC. I think we'll see the most of the SEC and the best of the Big 12. Some of the ACC schools, three or
Yeah,
four of them will jump in.
yeah,
I think they'll pull away from the NCAA. I think it'll happen in men's basketball and football, and the NCAA will then be bankrupt.
yeah,
So then the NCAA will be forced to, because let's face it, the NCAA needs football and basketball. Football
right,
and basketball does not need the NCAA at those top level schools. They don't need them.
right.
They
Yeah,
are the NCAA
that's right.
revenue source.
That's right.
Uh, Everything else costs money for a school. It doesn't
Yeah,
make the school money, the non-revenue sports.
yeah,
So I think it's inevitable. I don't
yeah,
know when it's going to happen, but when it happens, then sanity will have to come into play for the rest of the sports because I just picture this thing like a speedboat pulling a water skier and the water skier's legs got tangled up in the rope and the boat is being driven by football and basketball and they are not slowing down and
yeah,
we're being drugged behind it
yeah,
and the water skier in this case is all of the non-revenue sports. I mean, it's utter insanity that women's soccer at University of Washington is in the ACC.
yeah, yeah,
What are we doing? Or
yeah,
men's soccer. It's
right.
it's
Yeah,
it's insanity or bowling or whatever
yeah,
other sport you've got that doesn't make any money. Why are we in the ACC?
that's
It's
right. That's
it's
right.
it's insane
Yeah,
when you consider that, we had a perfectly fine Pac-10. There
yeah,
was there was
yeah,
nothing wrong with it for many years
right.
until American football and men's basketball needed to needed to be able to get more money to get to buy more players to, and now we're dragging the rest of the sports along with it.
And I
And
think what's that,
obviously what Jamie proved, not that
right,
we can't compete
right.
in soccer against the best, but that had nothing to do with it.
Yeah,
It was all about that revenue generation.
yeah.
So I truly think that that will be the ultimate solution, and it might be what's best for everybody else. But in the meantime, it's rough.
Well, and to your point, I think you're exactly right on that. And I do think that I agree they'll pull away. And I think what's happening now is all of the Division I schools, especially in the Power Four, are trying to invest enough money to be relevant and in that conversation of being one of the schools that is going to pull away, whether that's 32 or whatever that number ends up being.
Right.
Everybody's vying to try to be a player in that top
Yeah,
group.
sure.
So when they pull away, they can be part of that group. But I think you're right on with that. I've said that for a while. It'll eventually fraction off, and they will do their own thing, and then we'll see where it falls for the rest of the sports at that point in time. But yeah, that's probably more fearful to me than anything that we've got on our table right now with college athletics. And like I said, going back to the 2 semester, that'll play out the way it's going to play out. And and who knows, Don, it may be that we just don't have enough women coaches that ever want it, and it may never happen on the women's side. And if that's the case, then I'm just one voice in it. But I would rather see us go in a pathway that much more mirrors. And the other thing I would say too is that as a with the apathy, I think on the women's side, our group of leadership have made it clear to U.S. Soccer that they don't want to kind of partner with them. When the white paper came out and all that, where U.S. Soccer was willing to come in and help fund some of
Right.
the men, and if the men pulled out and kind of started their own group. And I think the women's coaches have made it clear to U.S. Soccer we're not interested in that kind of a pathway. And to the leadership's credit, I agree that we probably don't want U.S. Soccer running college soccer at this point, but I think we got to be smart about our relationship with them, because at least men's soccer has cultivated that relationship in a way that if something happens to college soccer and it happened to say fall in line with what Bubba Cunningham said, that everybody's going to now just become pay to play like Division III, then men's soccer has positioned themselves to go right into U.S. Soccer and have at least the
Right.
top schools have that funded. And we haven't done that with the women. We haven't cultivated
There.
relationship. And so I think that should be a concern for our leadership too, that we got to be careful that we cultivate a relationship, even if we don't want to answer to them, as a collective, but we've got to have plan B, and so this is why I think there's a really big picture out there that we have to stop being apathetic about this, and our coaches have to get involved and really put a voice in what's important to us right now, to our leadership, because we're going to get caught, literally with our pants down if we're not careful and not be prepared for what's happened until it happens, and then it's going to be too late. So I hope that the younger leadership that, as I get older and on my way out, I'm hoping that we have the leadership that will sustain this and pick the mantle up and at least give some clear credence to these things like a 2 semester model. Well, I know the majority's against it, but let's really dive into it and see what it's about, and maybe there's a balance in there. Or with this house settlement, can we really start to navigate a path for us based on a couple of scenarios that could happen due to this unsustainable model, that we can present, from a legislative standpoint to try to at least take care of our sport. So that's my hope. And listen, I really appreciate you giving me the platform to talk about it.
No, I really wanted to hear what you had to say about it because you're one of the few women's coaches that has been vocal
Right.
about this. I really haven't heard or seen any
No.
other women's coaches talk about it. And
Right.
that one, as you said, that one may or may not happen. I'll tell you the one that I think is going to happen and I think is interesting, and I want your take on this, is the 5-and-5 model.
Yeah.
And and
Yeah.
and
That
I
one's
don't
going to
know
happen.
that it's going to affect the women's side Well, it'll have an effect on soccer across the board. Where it'll really affect the men's side is the age limitation and the clock
That's right.
starting in a different way
Right.
than it does now. But what do you think about the 5-5?
Well, and I am with you. I think it's 100% going to happen. I think it's going to go through, and it's going to happen very quickly here. I do think it's going to have another effect, much like the portal has had, much like um, the playing seasons and that kind of thing's going to have. I think it's going to affect because now coaches are going to have to go in and make a decision. Since we've recruited 2 years in advance, do I go and decommit a 27 because
Yeah,
I want to keep a senior on one more year now that I can keep the senior? And we're already seeing that happen. You've already seen some posts about that. So it is going to have an effect in the recruitment process. Um, I'm not sure, to me, I do like the fact that it kind of caps some ages, and I do like the fact that, we don't need, like in basketball, you don't need G League players coming back and playing college basketball after they've been pros. But um, so the way the clock starts and the way it counts, I think is probably makes some sense. But I don't know why we couldn't just do that with the 4 year model.
right,
Because to
right.
me, the 5 years, just from an academic standpoint, throws things off. It's like, okay, I've graduated and now I can come play another years. I think you're going to find a lot of players taking, I don't want to use the word useless, but classes that aren't really needed just to get to play another semester. I don't think many of the 5th years will stay for a full 5th year. I think a lot of them will come back just for the semester to play in a 5th year. So I, and to me, you should get your degree in 4 years or less. So, now all of a sudden, what are you going to do? Start a master's that you can't complete, with a 5th year? Or are you just going to take some classes just to get you by so you're eligible? Like, it didn't academically make a lot of sense to me. But I do think it'll affect the recruitment because I do think it'll, now that once you kind of been in it a year or two, then everybody will be used to it, and you're recruiting players after 5 years. You know what's coming
Well,
back after
there's a
five.
couple of ways to look at it, Randy. Well, number one, when I coached at Cal State East Bay, we had a lot of kids that were in impacted majors that couldn't get one or two classes that they
Classes.
needed
That's
to,
right.
and
Yep.
like I would say a third of our soccer teams were not graduating in 4 years because they had to come back to take one or two classes anyways.
Yep.
The other
Yep.
thing is, you only need 12 units to be eligible, but we've got kids taking 18 units so they
Right.
can graduate in 4 years guaranteed. That
Right.
would slow that down. It would make it a
It
little
would.
bit easier on players.
Yep.
They could truly just take 12 units. They could have a little bit lighter schedule, and they wouldn't have to pack everything in
Yep.
quite as hard. I could see that happening. So
Right.
they could use a 5 year path.
Sure.
Um, and then for kids that graduate early because they've taken all these AP classes, then they might be able to start their master's degrees
Sure.
earlier and get a year and a half in. So for the really smart kids, it wasn't me, who needed things slowed down.
Yeah.
It would help. I could see it helping both ends of the spectrum. Look, they've done this in Canada
Uh-huh.
for forever
That's right. Yep.
in youth sports. They've had that 5 years to do
That's
it.
right. Yeah.
So I can see your end of the argument.
Yeah.
I can see the other end of the argument. And on the men's side, like I say, it's really, we've got 24-year-old freshmen coming in to play just 1 year of eligibility.
That's right. Yeah.
And that would pretty much stop
Yeah.
that from happening.
Yeah, I didn't really think that through, but I think you're right. That could lessen a load academically, and you could stretch things out 5. And I think all of that would be fine. Because you're right, there are some classes you can't get. You can only get it in the fall, but you can't take it because of soccer. So now you got to wait another
Right.
year to get in it or whatever. So I do see that. I think initially it's going to impact some of the recruits, the 27s, but I think once you've been in it a year or
That's the
two,
hard part on the women's side. Doesn't affect
yeah,
the men's side,
that's right.
but it
On the
definitely
women.
affects the women's side.
Yeah. But I think once you've done it and you got in it a couple of years, then coaches will just say, hey, I've got this money coming back after 4 years. Well, now you're just saying I've got this amount coming after five. So,
Do you think
yeah,
they'll implement the DSA again to compensate for the kids that
I
look,
would hope, I would
frankly,
hope
I
it
think the
would.
28-man roster is insane anyways. It needs to
Yeah,
be 32.
yeah,
I think it's absolutely bonkers.
yeah.
It was written by people that were not soccer people. That
That's right.
decision was
Yeah,
not a soccer decision to make a 28-man roster.
that's
It's
right.
ridiculous.
Yeah, yeah. No, I would hope they would DSA those kids so you wouldn't have to worry about them counting against you the fifth years, counting on your roster. And that way if you've had the finances to do both and you could still keep your 27 commits. Unfortunately, a lot of us didn't hear about the DSAs until after we had already let kids go on the 28
Right.
roster.
Right.
If we'd have known, there would have been some we wouldn't have let go, or we may not have let any of them go. So I hope if it's part of it, it's implemented. We know about it right away, and unlike
Right.
like we did last time. But I haven't heard any conversation to that effect that they're going to do
I
that.
haven't either.
So I'm a little concerned on that end of it. But
I had heard rumors that they were talking about bumping the roster limits, but
yeah,
that they may be just pure rumor
yeah,
or wishful thinking.
yeah. Well, when you're already talking, three, maybe in some cases, four of those are goalkeepers on your roster, and then you're always going to have injuries. I've never seen a college year where you haven't had some kind of injuries that keeps some players out. If you want to have enough to be able to do some full field work and that kind of thing, it's 28 does make that tough, does make that tough. So
Oh, yeah, no, it doesn't take you and I long at all to understand that we at some point in our seasons we are not playing 11v11 when we need to be
that's right.
playing 11v11 in
That's,
training.
that's right.
If we want to be successful
Yeah.
in getting our players to understand concepts and
Yep.
as going back to our earlier conversation, especially in a country where our kids aren't understanding tactics well enough,
Yeah.
there's
That's
no
right.
way I can do this with flags
Right.
alone. I
Yeah.
can do Saatchi flags a little bit, but
Right. That's right.
how much can I do with
Yeah. That's
Saatchi
right.
flags? Right. I need some players that can move.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, good.
Well, brother, what's next? What's next for Randy Waldrum? Now, you're not doing the the Nigerian women national anymore?
No, I stepped down after the Olympics in Paris.
Okay.
We'd made it to a World Cup and did quite well and made it to the Olympics, which was the first time in 16 years Nigeria had been to the Olympics. So afterwards, I stepped away and now I'm just, here at Pitt, continuing to kind of take on more like a technical director. I'm still coaching on the field every day, but Ben, my son, obviously is the head coach now. And we tried to put the office in a more professional type model where I'm kind of doing some GM technical director kind of roles. Um, and so that's what we're doing right now. And I'll see if there's another stop out there for me. I think I've got enough left in me to tackle an opportunity there. I would probably entertain another national team or the pros if that opportunity came available again, especially in light of what's going on with college soccer right now. I don't know that it's depending on what continues to shake loose. I'm not sure I want to continue to be in it, but for now I'm here and looking forward to the teams we have coming in. I think we got a chance to be really good again these next couple of years with our 26s and 27s that we've got committed. So I'm excited about that, and we'll see. But other than that, that's my life.
Well, you've still got a lot of life and a lot of energy in you. And um, yeah, I'd love to have you back on. We didn't even get into some of the things that I wanted to talk about, which is, how national teams work and putting those together and what the difference is in training sessions and the stress of those players coming in, especially, some of the stops that you've made with TNT and with Nigeria. These are not major footballing nations, but yet you had some incredible success.
Yeah.
I do want to have you back on
Well,
before
let's
long
hop.
again.
Yeah,
So
let's hop on and do that because I got some stories for you with those two between
I
Trinidad and
want to hear
Nigeria.
them.
we could probably shock some of your listeners if they knew what really went on behind the scenes. So
Oh no, we got to
let's
have
make
you
it a
back
point.
on.
Yeah,
Let's
let's
do it
make it a
soon.
point. Okay. All right. Well, listen,
Okay,
I thank
brother.
you so much for having me.
Thanks, Randy. Appreciate